My name is Samantha Reed, and I am 28 years old.
How are you paying for this place? My sister mocked me at dinner until the waiter revealed the truth, leaving my entire family in shock.
If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from.
It all began 5 years ago when I walked away from all my family expected of me. They always evaluated my decisions, dismissing my culinary ambitions as beneath our family name. They had no idea that today, as they assembled at Maison, one of the city's most elite restaurants, to celebrate my sister Vivian's engagement, they would be confronted with how much had changed.
My tummy tightened as I adjusted my plain black dress. Sometimes the most difficult reservations to make are about your own past. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, being a Mitchell meant something special. We were more than just wealthy. We left a legacy. My parents, Elizabeth and Charles Mitchell, based their identities on status markers like the correct address, schools, and occupations. Our enormous colonial home hosted fundraisers at which my mother paraded us children around like accessories, her pride proportional to how well we fit into her ideal of prosperity.
The Mitchell children are destined for greatness, she'd tell her acquaintances at garden parties, my father nodding in agreement behind his whiskey glass.
Vivian has already decided on Yale Law, and Daniel's mathematical abilities are really promising. He'll make an excellent investment banker. When guests looked at me, the middle kid, my mother's smile tightened. Draw his creative inclinations. She'll find her way.
What she meant was that I was the family's letdown.
While Vivian excelled at debate club and Daniel won math competitions, I spent countless hours in our housekeeper Maria's domain, the kitchen. Maria, a warm-hearted woman from Greece, saw something in me that my parents did not. Genuine passion.
You have the hands for this work, she'd add as I assisted her in kneading bread or neatly dicing vegetables. The way you taste, the way you smell, you understand food in your soul.
By the age of 13, I started developing my own recipes. When my parents went on vacation, I began holding underground dinner parties for my friends.
At 16, my kitchen became my sanctuary where I felt most completely myself. Cooking, a servant's work, my father remarked when I mentioned culinary school during my junior year of high school.
Mitchells hire chefs. They don't become them. To pacify them, I applied to business schools and eventually enrolled at Dartmouth, where my father and grandfather had gone. Even so, I found methods to pursue my genuine passion by taking food science electives and nutrition classes that I could rationalize as complementary to business administration. I launched an underground supper club in my apartment, charging students for inventive 5-course dinners to help support my covert weekend courses with local cooks. My double life lasted until graduate school. I was 6 months into an MBA program that was making me miserable when Chef Julien Marchang, a French culinary expert with 3 Michelin stars, came to campus for a lecture series. He approached me after sampling my meal at a university event during which I had assisted with catering.
"Who taught you to make a reduction like this?" he said, his accent strong but his gaze earnest.
"I taught myself," I said, "from books, videos, and experimenting." He handed me his card. "You're wasting your talent here. Come to my kitchen in New York and I'll make you great." That night, everything changed. 2 weeks later, I stood in my parents' beautiful living room, explaining why I was leaving my MBA program to go to culinary school. The quiet after my announcement was deafening. "This is absolutely unacceptable," my father eventually remarked, his voice dangerously low. "We've invested everything in your education."
"Everything except respect for what I actually want," was my reply.
My mother's expression stiffened. "If you pursue this hobby, you do so without our financial or other support." Vivian, who had just returned from a year of law school, chuckled coldly. "Always the rebel. Let's see how long you last cooking for minimum wage." Daniel, who already worked at a prestigious financial firm, simply seemed embarrassed for me. I departed that night with only my personal savings and a modest suitcase. The next 5 years were the hardest I'd ever known, working 18-hour days, living in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, and taking out loans for culinary school. But with Chef Julien's guidance, I thrived. The kitchen's intensity, discipline, and inventiveness nourished me in ways that business school never could. Then came the opportunity to change everything. An investor who tried my food at one of Julien's parties approached me with a business pitch. Maison launched 2 years ago with me as executive chef and partial owner. 6 months later,
I bought out my partners and became sole proprietor. The irony was not lost on me that I had ended up using my business education, but not in the way my parents had intended. Maison soon became the most difficult reservation to get in the city. Last month, Food and Wine magazine included us in their Future of American Cuisine issue. Throughout this, I kept my distance from my family. Occasional awkward phone calls with my mother, holiday cards, but nothing serious. They knew I was doing something with food, but they didn't know how successful I was. I chose to keep it that way. I desired recognition for my successes on my own terms, not as a means of eventually gaining their favor. So when the embossed invitation to Vivian's engagement supper arrived at my place, I was astonished. Even more startling was the location, my own restaurant. Of course, they couldn't have known it was mine. They presumably chose it because it was unique and magnificent, ideal for demonstrating their status. After several days of consideration, I decided to accept, not for affirmation, but possibly to finally close a chapter. 5 years of distance had provided me with perspective. I felt confident enough in my success to face them without breaking under their criticism. What I hadn't imagined was how it would feel to watch them dine in my restaurant and criticize the dishes I had worked so hard to create. But that was exactly what awaited me when I pushed open the huge glass doors of Maison that evening, ready to play the role of the struggling black sheep for the final time. As I came through the doors, the familiar aroma of Maison engulfed me. Saffron, reduced wine, and the faint perfume of fresh herbs, which I insisted on having delivered twice a day. Usually, this perfume grounded me and reminded me of everything I'd accomplished. Tonight, it only made me more anxious. I had carefully chosen my clothes, a modest black dress by Diane von Furstenberg, embellished with a single strand of pearls belonging to my grandmother. My status-conscious relatives would most likely misinterpret my understated elegance as an attempt to make do with inadequate resources. My hair was pulled back into a tidy bun, which they would likely read as me being unable to afford good styling. Adrian, my most senior server, noticed me right away, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. I rarely entered via the front door as a guest. I gave him a delicate shake of my head and mouthed, "Not yet." He nodded silently and resumed his tasks. I could see them from the entryway. They'd requested the middle table, my mother and Chanel, and my father examining the wine list with intense focus. Vivian wore what appeared to be new season Gucci. Next to her sat a man I didn't recognize, possibly Olivia, with slicked back hair and a watch that caught the light whenever he moved his wrist. Daniel and his wife Callista completed the picture, dressed in business clothing as if they had just returned from an important conference. Celeste, my hostess, approached with a friendly smile. "Good evening, miss." She stopped herself just in time. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to their table?" "Thank you, Celeste," I said quietly, appreciating her caution. As we neared, my mother recognized me, her eyes making a swift assessment that I knew from childhood. A head-to-toe scan determined the approximate value of my attractiveness and found it lacking. "Dar," she replied, rising to air-kiss my cheek. "You finally arrived. We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I said, checking my watch. 7 on the dot. My father stood and gave me a stiff hug, followed by an awkward pat on the back. "You look healthy," he said, implying that I hadn't maintained the borderline unhealthy slenderness valued in our social circles. Vivian barely stood, offering me her cheek to kiss. "This is Olivia," she said, as her fiancé rose and extended his hand. His grasp was overly tight, a power move I recognized from numerous business meetings. "Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA," he explained. "Just made junior partner at Goldman. There's no 'nice to meet you' or 'I've heard about you,' simply credentials and status." The Mitchells enjoy language. Daniel gave me a more sincere hello, but his wife Callista's grin appeared strained. I subsequently learned she had been assigned to locate this extremely exclusive restaurant for tonight's dinner and was concerned about whether it would match everyone's expectations. "Well," my mother began as I took the last unoccupied seat, "we've already ordered champagne. I hope that's okay." I noted they had chosen the most costly option on our list. Showy, but not reckless. Typical. The restaurant hummed with the enthusiasm I had worked so hard to create. The lighting was dark enough for intimacy and bright enough to highlight each dish's artistic plating. The sound level struck the perfect blend between conversation and seclusion. The tables were perfectly spaced, close enough to produce energy while remaining far enough apart for discretion. Every aspect was my choice, from the linen weight to the custom-designed chairs that encouraged diners to stay without being uncomfortable. I saw the staff's subtle reactions when they learned I was seated with customers. Marco Arlier attracted my attention as he approached with the champagne. The tiniest rise of his brow inquired whether I wanted him to acknowledge me. I gave an inconspicuous headshake. "Excellent choice," he told my father instead, presenting the bottle with practiced elegance before starting to pour. "We're celebrating an engagement," my father added unnecessarily, obviously looking for special treatment. "Congratulations," Marco said effortlessly. "Maison is honored to host such a special occasion. I'm surprised you managed to make a reservation," I responded casually. "I've heard it's quite difficult." Olivia leaned forward. "I know people," he said with a wink. I had to repress an eye roll since he was so smug. "Called in a favor with a client who's friendly with the management." I was chewing my lips. The client was most likely Craig Winters, one of our frequent investors, who occasionally requested tables for business associates. I made a mental note to talk to him about Olivia. "Well, aren't you resourceful?" I inquired, extending my champagne flute to Vivian and Olivia. "A perfect match and a brilliant future," my father said. We clinked glasses, and I took a little sip, observing that the champagne was poured at the exact temperature I had instructed my staff to keep. "So," my mother said, setting down her glass and focusing her gaze on me, "tell us what you've been up to these past few years. You've been so mysterious." The table's attention moved to me, 5 pairs of eyes evaluating and preparing to evaluate. "I've been working in food," I answered simply, "learning, growing." "Are you still in that cooking phase?" Vivian sighed, as if I'd admitted to a dreadful addiction. "I thought surely by now you'd have moved on to something more substantial." "Not everyone can handle the corporate path," Daniel added, making his argument sound like criticism. Olivia looked perplexed. "What exactly do you do?" "Line cook, catering, and various roles," I replied vaguely. "I've worn many hats." "Well, we're just glad you're able to support yourself," my mother remarked with a phony graciousness I recognized, though we've always said our door is open if things get too challenging. I observed Ivy, one of our most skilled servers, approaching with the amuse-bouche, which was a bite-sized sphere of compressed watermelon covered with fermented black garlic and a microgreen I had obtained from a specialized urban farm. "Compliments of the kitchen," she said delicately, setting one before each diner. Her eyes caught mine briefly, a spark of loyalty, before she returned to professional mode. "Is this all?" Vivian inquired, looking at the single taste with despair. "I'm hungry." "This is an amuse-bouche," I explained. "A palate opener. The meal hasn't actually started yet." "I know what an amuse-bouche is, Dar," she murmured. "I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law instead of playing with food." I watched as they all tried my creation. My mother took the tiniest possible bite, always mindful of calories. My father shoved the entire item into his mouth, barely hesitating to taste it. Daniel and Callista appeared to enjoy it, although Olivia made a show of evaluating the flavors like a wine connoisseur, using culinary phrases that made no sense. Only Vivian left hers undisturbed. "I don't do raw garlic," she stated. Though the black garlic was far from raw, it had been fermented for 60 days in a temperature-controlled atmosphere, a technique I had honed over 3 years of experimentation. As our server cleared the dishes, I noticed a look of sadness in her eyes at Vivian's untouched handiwork. In that moment, I felt protective, not of myself, but of my employees, who took great pride in their work. I had created Maison not only as a restaurant, but also as a family, united by shared enthusiasm rather than DNA. The evening had only barely begun, but I could already feel the old dynamic settling in. I was the outsider, the one who had chosen the incorrect route and wanted to justify my decisions. But unlike 5 years before, I now sat at this table with a secret strength, one that would eventually throw the entire relationship on its head. "So tell us about the wedding plans." I began purposefully diverting my gaze back to Vivian as our next course arrived, a delicate combination of homegrown tomatoes, homemade ricotta, and basil oil that took me months to master. Vivian brightened instantly. "We've booked St. Thomas Church, of course. Reception at the plaza for 100 guests, though. Mother thinks we should cut it to 350. "The guest list is getting unwieldy," my mother interjected. "The Astor Williams aren't speaking to the Bennett since that unfortunate yacht incident, so we can't seat them in the same section." I restrained a smile. The seriousness with which they analyze these societal calculations never ceased to astound me. 400 seems excessive, I ventured, taking a taste of the tomato dish. Olivia leaned forward. It's networking, not just celebration. Half those invitations are relationship investments. Exactly, my father agreed. Olivia understands the social capital aspect. A wedding of this caliber opens doors. And what about you, Dar? Vivian inquired, her tone suddenly stern. Any prospects on your horizon, or are you still too busy with your cooking? I observed she had scarcely touched her lunch, moving the heirloom tomatoes around her dish with apparent disdain. I'm focused on my career right now, I replied simply. Career, Daniel said with a slight laugh. Is that what we're calling it? My mom jumped in. Dar, dear, surely by 29 you're thinking about settling down. There's that lovely son of Elizabeth Whitley. He's in hospital administration, I believe. Very stable. I'm not looking to be set up, Mother. Well, your options will get more limited with each passing year, she said, especially in your situation. Before I could answer, our server appeared and cleared the course. I hadn't really detected the taste of my own invention since I was too stressed to fully enjoy it. Is there a problem with the dish? Ivy inquired, noticing Vivian's fully filled plate. Too acidic, Vivian said dismissively, and the tomatoes could have been riper. I bit my tongue. Those tomatoes had been picked at their finest that morning from an upstate farm that produced them just for us. I'm sorry to hear that, Ivy responded with studied diplomacy. I'll be sure to inform the kitchen. The next item arrived, grilled scallops with a brown butter emulsion and pickled ramps, a spring special that I was quite proud of. As the platters were laid down, I saw my family's reactions. Now this looks promising, my father said, biting into a scallop with a fork. He swirled his wine, a Sancerre that I had specially chosen to go with this entree. Decent wine list here, not exceptional, but passable. Marco, overhearing as he passed, gave me a swift glance. I gave him a gentle smile. Marco had been poached from a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris and had turned down offers from restaurants all around the world to collaborate with me. Sudra. Callista began, clearly attempting to include me. Daniel mentioned you work in food, but you never really specified what you do. Before I could respond, Vivian interrupted. She's probably hostessing somewhere, right? Dar using that business to greet, seat people, and hand out menus. Actually, I began. No shame in that, my father interjected. Everyone has to start somewhere. Though after 5 years, I would have expected some advancement. I've advanced, I answered quietly. Into what? Assistant manager at Applebee's. Vivian giggled at her own joke. Vivian, Daniel warned, demonstrating a rare moment of protection. What? I'm just being realistic. She chose to abandon her education for this passion project. Actions have consequences. I took a drink of wine, allowing the familiar flavors to ground me. And how is the law treating you, Vivian? Are you still at Henderson and Block? Her expression stiffened. I'm between positions at the moment, actually, taking time to plan the wedding. She was working too many hours, Olivia interjected. I told her, my wife doesn't need to kill herself at some firm once we are married. She can do charity work like my mother. I noticed a spark of resentment, frustration in Vivian's eyes, before she returned to a calm expression of agreement. The next entree was a pasta dish with hand-rolled tagliatelle, spring peas, pancetta, and mint, one of our specialty recipes that had been featured in Food and Wine. The portion size here is ridiculous, my mother said, glancing at the elegantly presented spaghetti. All this expense for 3 bites. It's about quality over quantity, Mother. You said the tasting menu is designed to take you through multiple flavors and textures. In my day, restaurants gave you a proper meal for your money, my father said. This cuisine nonsense is just a way to charge more for less food. I watched as he chopped his spaghetti rather than twirl it, breaking the beautiful strands I had hand-rolled that morning. So, how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food service salary? Vivian inquired plainly. This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I felt all eyes on me. I manage my finances carefully, I said. Oh, please, Vivian scoffed. A dinner here costs more than you probably make in a day. Who are you dating? Is he paying for this? I'm not dating anyone, I replied evenly. Then how can you possibly afford this place? She pressed. Are you in debt? Maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances? Vivian, Daniel warned again, looking uneasy. No, I want to know, she said. We all rearranged our schedules for this dinner that she suggested at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Either she's being financially irresponsible, or she's not being honest about her situation. The next item arrived, wonderfully cooked duck breast served with cherry gastrique and farro. Chef Sophia, who was in charge of the kitchen when I wasn't around, had done an excellent job. "This duck is undercooked," Olivia said after one bite. I looked at his plate. The duck was cooked perfectly medium rare, like it should be. "It's meant to be served that way," I said. "Medium rare is the optimal temperature for duck breast." "I prefer my meat well done," he said, motioning to a waitress. When Ivy approached, he spoke without glancing at her. "This is raw. Take it back and cook it properly." I observed a flash of displeasure in Ivy's eyes, which was soon concealed by professional courtesy. "Of course, sir. My apologies." As she took his plate, I caught her gaze and gave a little nod. She would know to have the kitchen prepare a new breast rather than overcooking the current one. "Really, Dar?" my mother remarked after Ivy had left. "You still haven't answered Vivian's question. How are you affording this dinner?" The tension around the table was apparent now. I could feel the familiar heaviness in my chest, something I'd experienced at innumerable family dinners growing up. The feeling of being cornered, assessed, and found wanting before I had a chance to speak. But I was no longer the same insecure young woman. I had created something I was proud of, and it was entirely mine. I debated revealing everything right then, seeing their emotions alter as they recognized which restaurant they were in and whose dish they had been evaluating so casually. Before I could make a decision, Olivia's overdone duck reappeared, devoid of all suppleness and nuance. "Much better," he declared after one bite, despite the fact that I could see from across the table that it had dried out and become tough. My father signaled for the wine list again. As Marco approached, with a leather-bound list, my father made a show of perusing it before pointing to one of our most costly options, a Bordeaux costing more than $800. "This one should suffice," he declared. I knew that bottle quite well. I chose it during a trip to France last year and met with the vintner in person. It was wonderful, but entirely inappropriate for the present and next courses. "May I suggest something that might pair better with the remaining dishes?" I thought about it. My father waved me off. "I think I know my wines, Dar." Marco caught my eye and softly asked for directions. I gave him a slight nod. Let my father have his way. This was hardly the hill to die on. The punches continued throughout the evening, including the last savory dish and dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart that was one of my personal favorites. Every dish drew some criticism. Every attempt I made to add to the conversation turned into proof of my failure. By the time coffee was served, I was emotionally exhausted. The double strain of suffering my family's disdain while witnessing them casually criticize my life's work was becoming unbearable. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating: the check. Adrian approached with a black leather folder carrying the bill and placed it discreetly in the center of the table. My father reached for it instinctively out of patriarchal duty, but Olivia intervened. "Please, Charles, allow me," he urged, with the practiced smoothness of someone who has used even charity as a power move. "Consider it my treat to celebrate the occasion." My father made the typical modest protest before giving in. I watched Olivia open the folder, his demeanor changing from confident smile to barely veiled horror as he recorded the sum. "Is there a problem?" my father inquired, noting the shift. No, Olivia responded swiftly, just confirming the calculation. I recognized what he was looking at. A dinner for 7, including premium wine pairings, special off-menu requests, and the $800 Bordeaux would cost well over $3,000. Not exorbitant for a restaurant of Maison's caliber, but certainly noteworthy. He grabbed for his wallet and slowly removed a black credit card, making sure everyone noticed the exclusive tier. Vivian, probably sensing his uneasiness, picked that opportunity to return to her previous probing. "So, Dar," she began, her voice full of false sweetness, "you never did say how you're managing to contribute to this extravagant dinner. We wouldn't want you stretching yourself financially on our account." All eyes returned to me. I could feel the classic dynamic emerging. Vivian, the successful one, myself, the suffering letdown. "I can cover my portion," I replied simply. "Can you, though?" she asked, leaning forward. "Because we all know what food service pays. Can you even afford this place?" The table went silent. The question hovered in the air, so purposefully offensive that even my parents were uncomfortable. "Vivian," my mother whispered, "perhaps this isn't—" "No, I want to know," Vivian argued, her eyes fixed on mine. "We've spent the entire evening pretending that everything's fine, that Dar's choice to throw away her education hasn't left her struggling. I think we deserve some honesty." I felt a scorching heat rise up from my chest to my cheeks. After 5 years of distance and developing my own life and success, nothing had changed. I was still the family's disappointment, and I was pushed to defend my presence. Olivia, possibly feeling an opportunity to regain control following the initial shock, joined in. If you need help with your portion, just say so. No shame in that. I don't need help, I stated, my voice tight. Then how exactly are you paying for this? Vivian inquired. Because a meal here costs more than you probably make in a week. I opened my lips to answer, finally revealing everything when Olivia frowned at the bill. Wait, there's a mistake here, he said. They've only charged us for the wines, not the food, he said sternly to Adrian. Excuse me, there's an error on our check. Adrian approached our table with perfect timing, as if he had been waiting for this moment. He most likely had been. My employees knew me well enough to be watching this scenario unfold. Is there a problem, sir? He inquired. Yes, you only charged us for the beverages and not the meal, Olivia responded, referring to the bill. Adrian stared at the check and then at me, his expression uncertain. In that moment, I made my decision. The charade had lasted long enough. I gave Adrian a small nod. There's no error, sir, Adrian responded calmly. The dinner portion has been taken care of. By whom? My father inquired, wondering. Adrian turned to face me, his professional manner giving way to a friendly smile. Welcome back, Miss Samantha. Your usual table is ready for your meeting with the investors. Would you like me to handle the situation? There was utter stillness over the table. 6 pairs of eyes looked at me with varying degrees of astonishment and incredulity. Thank you, Adrian, I murmured, my voice firm despite the excitement running through me. Yes, please. Close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab. The rest is on the house as usual. Very good, Miss Darr, he said, removing the folder from Olivia's now slack grip. Chef Sophia mentioned she'd like your opinion on the new spring menu items when you have a moment. I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting, I told him. As Adrian left, I stared directly at my family. Their reactions ranged from bewilderment to astonishment to the dawn of understanding. What? What is happening? My mother finally asked. I took a deep breath. The moment I had dreaded and secretly anticipated for 5 years had arrived. Welcome to Maison, I replied simply, my restaurant. The silence lasted for what seemed like an age. My father was the first to recover, his face changing from confused to calculated. Your restaurant, he said gently. You work here? No, father, I said, feeling a weird serenity settle over me. I own Maison. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor. That's impossible, Vivian exclaimed. This is one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It's been featured in major magazines. Yes, I agree. Food and wine. Last month, Bon Appetit before that. The New York Times gave us 4 stars in their review last year. Olivia stared at me as if I had suddenly begun speaking in tongues. But you said you worked in food. You were vague about everything because I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was struggling. I told you. And you've all made that abundantly clear tonight. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls. Her go-to gesture went socially unstable. Darling, why wouldn't you tell us about this achievement? Her emphasis on achievement said it all. Success made my decisions retrospectively acceptable in a way that passion never could. Would you like the full story? I inquired, glancing around the table. Without waiting for a response, I continued. After I left 5 years ago, I moved to the city with what little savings I had. I rented a tiny room in an apartment with 3 roommates in Queens. For a year, I worked 3 jobs. Prep cook at a bistro from 5 a.m. to noon, line cook at a midtown restaurant from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., and weekend shifts at a bakery. I took a sip of water and noticed their uneasy expressions. I slept 4 hours a night. I had blisters and burns up and down my arms. I studied technique obsessively in my rare free moments. Chef Julian, who had initially encouraged me to pursue culinary arts, took me under his wing. I became his sous chef within 18 months. Daniel looked at me with what appeared to be genuine attention. Callista seemed impressed. My parents appeared frozen in a condition of reappraisal. 2.5 years ago, I was working a private event at Julian's restaurant. A guest, Edward Lane of Lane Capital, tried my special course and asked to meet the chef. He was surprised to find someone so young had created what he called the most innovative dish he'd tasted in years. I made a circle around us. Edward became my investor. We discovered the location, which was a failed nightclub at the time. I created the concept, designed the menu, hired the personnel, and handled every detail, even the lighting fixtures and specialty plates. But the cost, my father remarked, his thoughts still apparently focused on the economics. A restaurant of this caliber in this location must have required millions. $3,400,000 for the initial investment, I verified, and Edward brought in 2 other investors. We opened to immediate acclaim, thanks in part to Julian's backing and industry ties. 6 months later, we were profitable. 3 months later, I used the restaurant's performance to acquire a loan and buy out my investors. I've been the sole owner for over a year. That's why you suggested we meet here, Vivan said quietly. You knew all along. Actually, no, I corrected her. Callista chose this place. Is that correct, Callista? All eyes were drawn to Daniel's wife, who blushed profoundly. I had no idea, Dara. The concierge at Daniel's firm recommended it as the most impressive new restaurant in town. I swear I didn't realize it was yours. Of course you didn't, I comforted her, and no one in the family knew. That was deliberate on my part. But why keep it a secret, my mother pressed. We are your family. We would have been proud. I couldn't help but chuckle sharply. Would you? The same family that dismissed cooking as servant work, who completely ignored me when I chose culinary school, and who just minutes ago made disparaging remarks about my life choices. My father cleared his throat. Now, Dar, he said, that's unjust. We were anxious about your stability and future. If we'd known you had this level of commercial acumen. That's exactly my argument, I interjected. You couldn't appreciate my passion only. It only has worth for you now because it is associated with achievement and prestige. Chef Sophia entered our table in her crisp whites. Sophia Delgado, chef cuisine, monogrammed on the breast, and cut an attractive figure. Sorry to interrupt, Dar, she began. But the Matsuhisa party has arrived for their tasting, and Armand would like to confirm your interview for next week's feature. Also, your publisher inquired regarding the cookbook cover design. I nodded. Thank you, Sophia. Please let them know I'll be there shortly. As Sophia walked away, I noticed my family's eyes widen in surprise. Cookbook? Vivian repeated. Coming out this fall with COP, I replied. 120 recipes with personal stories. Dar, my mother continued, her voice taking on the soothing tone she used when attempting to control a social situation. This is all really amazing. Why haven't you told us sooner? We could have assisted and supported you. How did you support me when I needed it the most? I asked quietly. By entirely shutting me off. We believed it was a phase, my father complained. How did we know you had such a strong entrepreneurial spirit? You have clearly inherited my business sense. I was furious at his attempt to take credit for my achievement. I built this myself, I replied firmly, without your connections, money, or support. Olivia, who had been curiously silent, suddenly brightened up. A cookbook agreement must come with a significant advance, and this location, he gestured around appreciatively, his earlier criticisms forgotten, must generate big revenue. Do you have plans to expand? Maybe a restaurant group? I have several contacts in hotel investment who may be interested. I'm doing quite well with my current advisors, but thank you, I replied. Vivian gave him an irritated glance before returning her gaze to me. So, all this time, when I thought you were failing, you were actually succeeding, building all this. Yes, I answered simply. And tonight, she said, her voice sharpening, you let us sit here criticizing your food, wine list, and portion sizes, all while knowing it was yours. I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was still the family failure, I said, and now I know. That seems manipulative, she snapped, but I could feel her discomfort behind her rage. What's more deceptive than questioning how I could afford to eat here, and then implying that I must be in debt or dating someone affluent to afford a lunch at this table? I responded, You weren't concerned about me, Vivian. You were relishing your perceived supremacy. As we spoke, the restaurant was gradually emptying as the evening service came to an end, and Marco approached with a bottle. Your special reserve cognac, Miss Samantha, he explained, for your investors' meeting. And Chef Sophia says, he continued, the kitchen is ready whenever you arrive. Thank you, Marco. Please let Sophia know I'll be there in 10 minutes, I told him. As he walked away, I went back to my startled family and said, I have a business to run. Rising from my seat, thank you for coming this evening. Dar, wait, my mother shouted hastily. Do not leave like this. We should congratulate your success. Perhaps we could all have brunch this weekend and catch up properly. I looked at her and saw for the first time not the terrifying figure of my upbringing, but a lady attempting to reclaim her pride and status. I'll think about it, I replied, but right now I have investors waiting and a kitchen to oversee. As I started to go, Daniel stood up. Dar, he said, his voice softer than the others. For what it's worth, what you've built here is incredible. It's remarkable. I apologize for not supporting you sooner. Of all the responses, his felt the most genuine. I gave him a modest gesture of recognition before leaving the table where I had just altered the dynamics of my family forever. I had just walked 10 feet when I heard the click of heels behind me. Turning around, I saw my mother rushing to catch up, her flawlessly poised facade beginning to crumble. "Dar, please," she begged, lowering her voice. "You can't just dismiss this insight and go away. We need to discuss this." I looked toward the private dining room where my genuine investors, a group of people considering finance for my next restaurant concept, were waiting. "I have a meeting, Mother." "Postpone it," she pleaded. "This is family." "Family hasn't been a priority for you in 5 years," I responded, maintaining a steady tone. "My business commitments don't suddenly become optional because you finally decided my career is worthy of your attention." The rest of the family had followed her, forming an awkward cluster near the bar area. My father was visibly uncomfortable, unaccustomed to not being in control of a situation. Viven's expression alternated between bitterness and something that could have been respect. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow," my father proposed in his problem-solving business tone. "Dinner at our place." "We have a lot to talk about," Olivia said hopefully, including how we can help you grow. "My firm specializes in—" "I don't need your help," I said firmly. "I didn't develop this place only to get your approval. I built it since it's what I enjoy and I'm good at. The fact that it's successful doesn't make my passion any more valid than it was 5 years ago." "No one is saying that," my mother countered. "Darling, we're simply proud of what you've accomplished." "Are you proud, Mom? Or are you pleased that my choices no longer make you feel embarrassed in social situations?" Her flinch informed me I had struck near to home. "That's unfair," my father said. "We've always wanted what's best for you." "No," I corrected him. "You wanted what was consistent with your vision for me. There is a difference." Sophia stood by my side, her presence a pleasant reassurance. "The Halver group is asking if you'll be joining them soon," she whispered quietly. 5 minutes, I assured her. As Sophia nodded and went away, I returned my attention to my family. "I need to go, Dar." Vivian took a step nearer, her voice lacking its normal harsh edge. "I owe you an apology. The things I said tonight were unkind." "They were honest," I said. "That's the silver lining of the evening. I got to witness exactly how you guys perceive me when you believe I'm struggling." "That's not fair," Daniel replied, joining the argument. "People make decisions based on what they know. We didn't know." "You didn't know I was successful," I clarified, "but you didn't know I was doing something I enjoyed." That should have been sufficient for my family to demonstrate fundamental respect. A deep silence fell over the group. "You're right," my father finally remarked, startling me. "We should have supported your passion regardless of its outcome." This acknowledgement was significant, since Charles Mitchell didn't admit faults readily. "Where should we go from here?" my mother inquired, genuine uncertainty in her voice. Another rare. I took a deep breath and considered the topic. Despite everything, these people were my family. The grief they caused was real, but so was our shared history. I had never aimed for complete estrangement, just enough distance to construct my own life without their judgment clouding my decisions. "I don't know yet," I replied candidly, "but tonight has made one thing plain. If we are to continue our relationship, we must do it on different terms. I'm not a family failure looking for redemption. I am a successful chef and business owner who deserves the same respect as any other professional." "Of course," my father responded promptly. "And that means no more comments about my life choices, no more unsolicited career advice, and absolutely no attempts to network through my restaurant," I said, casting a hard glance at Olivia, who managed to appear ashamed. "About Vivian's wedding?" my mother asked tentatively. "How about it?" "We'd still like you to be there," Vivian whispered softly. "As my sister, not as whatever we thought you were before tonight." I glanced at her, trying to see past the years of competitiveness and judgment. Despite everything, there had been beautiful times, secrets shared as youngsters, support after heartbreaks, intimate jokes no one else understood. "I'll be there," I vowed. Then, after a moment of thought, I added, "And if you'd like, I could host a dinner for the wedding party here at Maison as my gift." Vivian's eyes widened. "You'd do that after how we've treated you." "You're still my sister," I answered simply. "But to be clear, I'm not seeking your approval. It's me presenting something I'm proud of on my own terms." "I understand," she replied quietly. "And I would be honored." We exchanged genuine smiles for the first time that evening. "Now, I really do need to go," I remarked, pointing to the private dining room. "Of course," my father said. "Your business comes first." "Not always," I told him. "But tonight, yes." As they prepared to leave, I mentioned, "I'm free for brunch on Sunday. Not in your club, however. There's a small establishment in the East Village that I suggest you should visit. We'll be there, my mother said, relieved at the slight opening. As I watched them leave the restaurant, their viewpoints had irreparably changed, and as the door closed behind them, I exhaled deeply, feeling strangely lighter. Sophia approached again. Is everything okay? Getting there, I responded. Family is complicated. Tell me about it, she said. My mother still introduces me as her daughter, who works at a restaurant like I'm a teenage waitress at Denny's. I smiled, pleased for her understanding. Let's go talk about the spring menu. I am very excited about some of my new ideas. As we proceeded toward the kitchen, my refuge, my achievement, my actual home, I understood that the most important discovery of the evening was not showing my family what I'd accomplished, but completely recognizing it myself. I had achieved this achievement on my own terms, without their approval, and that understanding was more valuable than any recognition they could possibly provide. Spring menu planning, meetings with my publisher regarding the cookbook layout, and preliminary negotiations about a potential second location kept me quite busy for the past 2 weeks. But recollections of that family supper stayed, intruding in quiet moments, demanding reflection. Sunday breakfast had gone unexpectedly well. I'd brought my family to Elma's, a hidden treasure managed by a former colleague from my early days working the line. My parents had been visibly uneasy about the mismatched chairs and graffiti-decorated walls, but the food, unpretentious yet masterfully executed, had won them over. I never knew simple eggs could taste like this, my father had admitted, mopping up the last of his shakshuka with homemade sourdough. Small steps, not a complete transformation, but an opening. Sitting at my usual table after closing time, I watched the staff complete their final duties. Ivy was counting the register while humming softly. Adrienne and Marco were discussing wine pairings for tomorrow's private event. Sophia had left an hour ago after we'd finalized the spring menu revisions. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Wedding planning nightmare. Flora's just doubled their quote. Any chance you're free for coffee tomorrow? Could use some straight. I smiled slightly at this unexpected request for my opinion, and I texted back confirming a time and place. The relationship with my family was evolving into something I couldn't have predicted. Measured respect between adults with different values and paths. My mother had called 3 times in the last 2 weeks, her usual formality softening into genuine questions about my work. My father had sent an article about female chefs breaking barriers in the industry, a silent acknowledgement that he was trying to understand my world, and Daniel had reached out asking if he could bring his children to see the kitchen sometime. I want them to know they have options, he'd said, that success doesn't have to look the same for everyone. These were fragile beginnings, not the dramatic reconciliation of a Hollywood movie. Real healing, I discovered, occurs in quiet moments and modest gestures in the incremental rewriting of old patterns. The most significant shift, however, was not in my family's image of me, but in how I had finally stopped assessing my worth through their eyes. The validation I had always frantically sought from them now felt strangely unneeded, since I had proven myself, not to them, but to myself. This realization had rippled through other areas of my life as well. I'd launched a mentorship program for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering them the guidance and opportunity I'd fought so hard to find. Chef Ivy's voice interrupted my thoughts. We're all ready for closing. Is there anything else you need before we leave? No, thank you. I cracked a joke. You all did amazing work tonight. As the staff went out calling their good nights, I remained at my seat, my notebook open to a blank page. I'd been attempting to articulate the introduction to my cookbook, fighting to find words that conveyed my trip, and in the stillness of the empty restaurant, I finally began writing. Food has always been my truest language. When words failed, I communicated through flavors, and when pathways were obscure, I followed my palate. The recipes in this book are more than just recipes. They're chapters of a life lived in quest of authenticity above approval. 5 years ago, I was at a crossroads between expectation and passion. Choosing the latter cost me dearly at first, but ultimately led to the richest feast I could have imagined. Not only professional success, but the discovery that true wealth isn't measured by external validation or material achievement, but by the courage to honor your own voice, even when it speaks in whispers against the shouts of doubt. I lay down my pen, the words finally flowing freely. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, a difficult vendor negotiation, Vivian's wedding planning drama, and the finalization of the cookbook introduction. But today, in this moment of peaceful thought, I felt inner calm. The journey had not been easy. There had been nights of exhaustion so complete that I'd fallen asleep in kitchen corners during rare breaks, burns and cuts that left scars on my hands, and moments of doubt so intense that I'd questioned everything. But I had persevered not to prove my worth to others, but because I couldn't imagine living any other way. By choosing authenticity above acceptance, I discovered something more valuable than success or familial validation: myself. Have you ever had to choose between meeting others' expectations and following your own heart? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more true stories of resilience and triumph, and share with someone who may need a reminder that the most important approval comes from within.